Today we're talking about the Traditional Knowledge Bill. Now, I know there's been quite a few debates of late around this particular bill. Why so?
Well, if you look at the background and the history, there was a biodiversity conference or meeting international in South America in about 1999, where a number of items which were important to preserving biodiversity and the benefits of that were discussed. One of those benefits was traditional knowledge, where, and we'll come to that. Essentially, what and of course South Africa signed the legislation around that. They signed the treaty. So then South Africa was obliged to take steps to protect its traditional knowledge. And the bill, or currently proposed legislation, identifies the traditional knowledge. It looks at protecting that traditional knowledge through the intellectual property laws, the current suite of laws.
Maybe just break it down for our viewers in layman's terms, what traditional knowledge actually means.
Essentially, traditional knowledge is any intellectual property that can be associated with a traditional community. What a traditional community is, a community that currently lives within the borders of South Africa or historically used to live within the borders of South Africa.
So could it be music?
Most definitely it's music. Most definitely it's artwork.
It's artwork,
Exactly.
music. Okay.
That's right. And I mean, therein lies part of the problems. The bill came up for comment at a public hearing in Cape Town about 2 weeks ago and was slated. The reason it was slated was because what is the nature of this? It's artwork or works that can be associated with a traditional community. Okay, no problem. What is that? Well, let's take, for example, your Ndebele wall paintings, the wall murals. Let's assume that I'm an artist and I take a look at these things and I like what I see. So what I decide to do is adopt that as my genre.
Right.
And I start producing these things. What happens to that? First of all, I don't own it. It goes back to the community. The royalties go into an intellectual property fund. They're remitted to the community. So what's going to happen? And this is the problem. What's going to happen? I will find another genre. Why must I work in this field where I'm not going to be remunerated, where I'm not going to get the benefits? Likewise with music. It's exactly the same, where you'll have this traditional character music, and if that's my genre, then I'm not going to derive the benefits as I think they should. So therefore I'm going to find something else to go and do. Other examples of it, for example, are things like rooibos tea.
Ah, yes.
Or honeybush
Something
tea.
truly South African.
Yes, except of course the rooibos trademark's owned by the United States.
Really?
That was an example of
How
what
did that happen?
before any of this was even on the cards, you were looking at exporting it to the United States, exploiting it there, registering the trademark there, and then a United States company taking over the trademark.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
And what we've got with this traditional knowledge legislation is to try and stop that happening. Let's keep the South African intellectual property in South Africa. Or at least, well, you don't want to. You want to exploit it as widely as possible. But you do want it to be identified as South African.
Of course.
You do want the benefits to accrue to the South Africans.
What else does the bill aim to set out to do?
It looks at collecting royalties, paying them into an intellectual property fund. It looks at remitting those royalties to the communities from where the intellectual property originated. And patents are not included, simply because patents that's already been amended in terms of our Patents Act. So you can't, for example, come along, look at what is available in terms of traditional medicines, take that away, then extract the active principles and patent it, for example, in the United States. Let's pick on the Americans. Patent in the United States and then make a small fortune out of it there. So you can't do that, and part of it must come back.
Right.
There are all sorts of problems with it.
What's the answer here? Do you think it will be sorted out? Do you think it's a bit vague?
I don't know what the answer is. I think the legislation's gone too far down the road to be changed easily.
Right.
The current thinking that I agree with is you should have a sui generis system. Sui generis just means a thing on its own. In other words, create this new form of intellectual property, a traditional knowledge right or something, and then legislate and around that. I mean, once upon a time, patents were sui generis. The earliest patent I can find is, I think it's 1474 for Venetian glass.
So that's how it all started.
And then later you found people writing things, books, then copyright. Trade, you've got trademarks coming into it. So intellectual property is not static. You don't have to squeeze it in where a lot of people think it's just not going to fit.
It can evolve and it can make place for new...
The law must evolve. Otherwise we'd all go back to applying the ancient Roman law, where people would be, I could divorce my wife by just telling her I divorce her 3 times or something.
That would be rather interesting in the 21st century.